Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. This month on this channel, we're going to be talking about heartbreak. And when I say heartbreak, I don't just mean the pain of a romantic relationship ending. Hearts can break in all sorts of different ways for all sorts of different reasons, but today we actually are going to be talking about the pain of a romantic relationship ending. Now, the reason I wanted to make this video, a video about what to do when you find yourself in the place of knowing that you should or want to leave the romantic relationship that you're in, but you can't seem to take that leap because you feel too attached, is kind of twofold. So one, this is a video that I desperately wish that I had at various points in my attachment healing journey. But also, in part, this is a response to a very specific type of comment that I frequently see getting left on both my videos or other kind of similar videos in the space of relationship healing, which is anything along the lines of, what do I do if I want to internalize this stuff and I want to work to have a healthier or more communicative relationship or whatever it is, but my partner has absolutely no interest in joining me on that? Essentially, how do I get someone else to care about me, to take my needs seriously, and to work with me on changing our relationship dynamic? And I think the kind of go-to response that people tend to get in that situation is, well, maybe that's a person that it's not going to be possible for you to have a healthy relationship with. Maybe that's a relationship that you should leave, because these types of skills and tools and practices only really work if both people are committed to making a change. And while that might be the truth, and in fact, I believe it usually is, you can't make any sort of substantial relational change if only one person is bought into it. It still does not mean that that's an easy thing to do. So to me, it always feels a little bit dismissive when someone is coming in and going, hey, I'm so motivated to work on all of this stuff, but the other person in the relationship is not. To just tell that person, well, get out of that relationship. Because I know firsthand that there are situations we can get into in life in relationships where someone saying, just leave the relationship, feels kind of like them saying, just saw your own leg off, right? It's not an easy thing to do because so many other parts of our lives and our self-concepts can get baked into really unhealthy relationship dynamics. And then it feels like we're going to be losing an unbearable amount of ourselves or our resource if we're to leave that person. And of course, that's not what we want, right? We don't want to be in the position where our relationships are providing us with so much of our sense of self or so much of our connection to the world or to other people that leaving them feels like sawing our own legs off. But sometimes that's a situation we find ourselves in. So what we're going to do with this video is do a really deep breakdown, get really granular about all of the things that tend to get tied up in relationships that make it feel hard to leave them. And then we're going to talk about how we can start to strengthen or work slowly on each of those areas to bring ourselves to a place where, if what we have already decided in our minds and our hearts is that we want to leave the relationship, it feels relatively easy to do that. Now, of course, leaving any relationship, especially a romantic relationship, especially a long-term romantic relationship, is never going to feel painless. But what we're trying to do here is get the pain to a level where it feels manageable. So we're going to look not at should I stay or should I go, but at the question of, if I know in my gut I should or I want to go, but I just cannot bring myself to do it. Why can I not bring myself to do it? What's unconsciously operating for me that's keeping me in this? And what would I have to do in order to get to a place where leaving feels bearable? This is about to be a bit of a graphic metaphor, but there's a movie that came out several years ago called 127 Hours. That's the true story of a guy who got stuck in, I believe it was a canyon, when he was doing some sort of outdoor sport, and his arm was trapped under this boulder. And he stayed there for 127 hours waiting to see if he was going to get rescued. And eventually he realized the only way to free himself was to amputate his arm. And so this movie, which is based on a real story that happened, kind of moves us through this mental process that this man goes through, where he eventually realizes, I have to get rid of this thing that I once thought was absolutely vital and I would never consider getting rid of in order to save myself. How do I find a way to do this? And I apologize for the kind of mental image that accrues. But what I want to track this with is the idea that when we end up in these relationships that are deadening our spirits, there's something about the way we're showing up in the relationship that feels like a deep self-abandonment. It's kind of like your inner child has their arm stuck under a boulder, and that inner child is losing energy. They're losing their livelihood, their creativity, their joie de vivre. They're losing their hope and their optimism the longer we stay trapped under that boulder. And so this video is essentially about how to safely do that amputation, to cut off that part of your inner child's dependency on someone else in order to save their life. And this is going to hurt immensely in the short run, right? When that guy was amputating his own arm, it was not a pleasant experience. And I will bet you any money the recovery was also not a pleasant experience. But he lived. And he's still here today to tell that tale. And this is the same principle we need to apply in situations where our inner children, so the parts of ourselves that are young and emotional, get attached to a situation or a person or a relationship that is in part draining their life force. We, as our adult selves, have to make the decision, do I cause this child immense pain in the short term in order for them to eventually make a recovery and get that healthy emotional self back online, or do I leave them stuck under this boulder and let them die there? What it means when we let our inner children die is often a deep sense of depression, a feeling of our lives ceasing to matter, or of the decisions that we make in our lives ceasing to have importance to ourselves or to the world or to other people. And this is not saying that it's the other person's fault if this is happening. Very often with insecurely attached relationships in particular, both people are coming in with a set of norms and beliefs around relationships that are actually quite damaging to themselves, but it's just what they learned about what love looks like. So this is not to say that it's the other person's fault necessarily if you're feeling like this. It could be that your patterning and the things that you've internalized about relationships are causing you to consistently choose partners you are not compatible with, or who you don't have shared values with, or whatever it is. And that alone, even if the other person and yourself are completely well-meaning, is enough to slowly drain your life force over time. So what we're talking about today is how to safely do that emotional amputation if you have already decided that it needs to be done. And we're going to talk about this in 3 steps. Step 1 in this process is contextualizing the situation properly for yourself. So I think that a lot of people, particularly those who have insecure attachment styles or early relational wounds that may have grown into something like complex PTSD, stay in relationships that they know they ought to or want to be out of because they're expecting the regular relationship adages and the regular breakup advice that they see out in the world to apply to their situation. So if I have this story in my head, because I am basing my idea of what a breakup looks like on a secure relationship, that I should feel totally confident, that I should be in a shared reality with my partner by the time we part ways, and that I should feel kind of happy and good about my decision when I'm leaving, I'm probably never going to reach that point if my relationship is not a secure one. Insecurely attached relationships and secure relationships function in fundamentally different ways, okay? And if we are expecting the breakup of an insecure relationship to look and feel like the breakup of a secure relationship, we are probably going to end up staying in our situation forever because it might never get to the point where we feel calm, clear-headed, and good about moving on from it. So the 2 kind of main reasons why insecure breakups are different than secure breakups is because 1, if you are insecurely attached, it's highly likely that you are lacking a lot of invisible resource that helps secure people through their breakups. And when I say invisible resource, I mean things like self-esteem. So a sense of, I am still a good, worthwhile, lovable person when I step out of this relationship. or mental and emotional stability. There are all of these things that people who are more secure kind of take for granted when they get out of a relationship that help them to process it in a clean way that are not necessarily available to those who are more insecurely attached. And the second reason it tends to be harder for people in insecurely attached relationships to leave them are because it's highly likely that if you are not secure, you are also dating another person who is not secure. And if that other person is not secure, it means that you're going to be dealing with extra challenge around getting in a shared reality about a breakup. So let's say you're dating someone who's super anxious, and you might feel like, to me, it's very clear that this relationship is not working or it's dysfunctional or whatever it is, but they don't want to look at that. And they're going to keep insisting, no, this is true love, right? True love means just persisting through all of this. So they might have a kind of warped idea of what a relationship looks like. Same goes if you have a more dismissing partner. So let's say you're struggling with really not getting the support that you need out of the relationship or the emotional intimacy, but your partner is continuously insisting, no, this is a perfectly normal relationship. You're just wanting too much connection or too much intimacy because their model of a healthy relationship is very different from your model. But both of these things are going to make it extra challenging to decide when to end the relationship because in a secure relationship, people tend to have more similar values and expectations for the relationship. And there's usually a much higher degree of agreement on whether or not the relationship is working and whether or not each person's needs are getting properly met. So if things feel weird and off for one person in the relationship, there's a very high chance in a secure dynamic that things also feel weird and off for the other person. Whereas in insecure dynamics, you can have the total opposite. You can have one person who feels completely satisfied and wants to argue that there's nothing wrong with the relationship, while the other person is absolutely suffering chronically. So this leads us to the first point about what's different from a secure, or what I'm going to call a simple breakup, from an insecure or a more complex breakup. When a relationship is comprised of two secure people, generally by the time you're approaching a breakup, it's coming from a relatively conscious and integrated place. Again, because secure people are making relatively few distortions, there's generally going to be pretty clear and pretty explicit conversations throughout the relationship about what each person's expectations are. And so if they get to a place where a breakup is looming, it's often because they've had these conversations over and over again, where they're coming towards this shared awareness that there's just some big value that one of us holds that the other one doesn't. Or there's just different things that we want out of our relationship with each other. Or there's different ways we want to live our lives or raise children or whatever it is. And so it's going to be pretty clear why the breakup is happening to both people. That does not mean it will not be incredibly painful because they might miss each other terribly. But it does mean that they can rest easy knowing that they made the right choice because they truly and honestly explored various options and were honest with each other about what was and was not going to work. So it might be really sad to learn that they want different things or that they're not compatible in certain ways, but it's going to be easy to understand. Now, contrast this with an insecure attachment relationship, in which case relationships often end based on an unintegrated decision. To be insecurely attached means to be relating to other people through unconscious strategy. And when we are relating to other people through strategy, it means we are necessarily, whether we mean to be doing this or not being completely honest about what all of our needs and values and expectations are. And that might be because not all of those things are even conscious to us. So we might not know why it is that we feel so chronically frustrated with our partner, or why it is that we can't seem to leave even though we think that we should. There are parts of ourselves that we have hidden from ourselves, which means we can't really integrate them clearly into our decision making. And if our partner is insecurely attached and also operating from a different strategy, it means they too have needs, wants, values, whatever it is, that they have hidden from themselves that might come out unconsciously in their behaviors, but that they're not able to be clear and direct with us about. So often it feels really confusing trying to figure out if you should stay or go in a relationship where both people are insecurely attached. Because what you'll often have is one, or in most cases, both partners acting in ways that differ wildly from what their stated wants, needs, and values are. You might have someone telling you, yeah, I really want, let's say, a long-term commitment. I want to start a family, whatever it is, but their actions do not match that at all. And that can be really challenging to integrate because you have to go, do I stick with this part of me that wants those things and the part of them that is telling me they want it? Or do I really look at the behavior that's happening here, which points me towards the opposite thing being true? Or you might have an anxious leaning partner who just tells you over and over again that you are their favorite person in the world, that they can't imagine life without you, but it also feels like they're chronically kind of angry at you or actually really displeased with your priorities and values that they're claiming they like. So it can be really confusing trying to figure out whether to stay or go in a relationship where both your actions and the other person's actions do not align with their stated values, needs, expectations for the relationship. This can make it really challenging to reach an integrated decision, which leads us to our next problem. When secure people or people having what I call a simple breakup exit the relationship, they have a very clear and coherent narrative about why it happened. So it's also not particularly difficult for them to go to friends and family members, explain the entire spectrum of what happened. So I really love this person. I really wanted to be with them, but it turned out we just weren't compatible in these ways. Or it turned out we just didn't want the same things, or I wasn't happy in X, Y, or Z ways. I never really felt fully seen and fully understood by the other person. Whatever it is, there's usually a very balanced view of it that they're able to give their friends and family members, which leads to really deep, accurate mirroring. And that co-regulation, that ability to go to other people and have our pain be seen accurately, is incredibly important in the healing process. Because it kind of reminds us, okay, I'm all right. There are other people in the world who understand me and can mirror me back to myself. And so it takes a little bit of that anxiety away from the experience of leaving someone else who we felt knew us really deeply. In that scenario, it's very easy for our friends and families to understand something like, I really miss this person, even though I know it was best for me to leave them, right? Because we've given them all the information that helps them understand both what we're sad about and why we decided that this was the best choice anyways. Now, contrast this with an insecure or more complex breakup. When our attachment styles are not secure, by definition, what we are doing is distorting our experience in some way. So that often leads us with an unintegrated or unclear representation of the relationship itself. And that makes it really challenging for us to give the right information to other people to allow them to mirror us back to ourselves clearly. Our attachment systems, which include the distortions that they lead us to make, are the most online when we are under distress. And breakups tend to be highly distressing experiences. So if you err more avoidant and you're going through a breakup, what's likely to come online is the part of you that finds a way to write the experience off as unimportant. And if that's what you're communicating to the people around you, I went through this breakup, but it's for the best, I feel great, and that might be true and authentic to what you do feel at the moment. What's not being mirrored back to you is the pain and the sadness that you're experiencing unconsciously. And the same is true in the opposite direction. If you are anxious and you go through a breakup, what's going to come online is the part of you that either idealizes or villainizes the other person. And you might have different parts online on different days. So maybe for the entirety of your relationship, you idealize this person and let all your friends know about them in an extremely positive way, when in reality, there was a lot of things that weren't working inside of the relationship. The people around you might have no idea of that. So they're not able to give you true mirroring about what was actually there inside of the relationship, the way that it was getting mirrored for you while you were in it. And the same is true if you were chronically villainizing your partner inside of the relationship or after leaving. Your friends and family are going to kind of have this idea of your partner that's very negative, and they might not understand why you miss them so much. Or you might have too much pride to admit that you do miss them immensely, even though There were a lot of things that you were very angry about. And again, when we have a secure worldview, we're able to hold conflicting feelings inside of a larger picture. So we're able to see other people as nuanced and multifaceted. So I really love this person, but they really drove me crazy in this way, right? And we're able to give someone all of that in an integrated way. When we are not securely attached, it can be really difficult to hold conflicting ideas about one person in our minds simultaneously. So you portray them to others in a very black or white way, and then don't get the full spectrum of your feelings mirrored back to you. This leads to unsatisfying co regulation because you're unable to explain the full nuance of the situation to other people. So it can start to feel like the only other person who's capable of understanding the relationship I was in was this other person who was in it with me, because that might literally be true if both of you are kind of defaulting to black or white thinking about it. It's going to be hard to feel seen by other people, which is going to not give you that deep level of co regulation that really does help when we're experiencing heartbreak. To take the situation to other people and have our pain and our anger and our hope and everything in between mirrored back to us by the people around us. When all of that does happen and we're able to see the bigger picture in our breakups, it leads to a very clean sense of grief. So, what I mean by that is that when we are grieving a secure relationship breakup, it often feels incredibly challenging emotionally, but we're also very understanding of why that challenge is happening. So, while we're crying, while we're grieving, while we're raging, whatever it is, we also have this very strong sense of, I know why I'm going through this, right? I'm aware that my feelings are hurt, but I'm not internally conflicted about what to do. I'm not second guessing myself over and over and over again about whether or not I should have left that relationship. I'm not thinking, what if I'd tried this strategy or that strategy? Because I wasn't operating based on strategy. I laid all my cards on the table. I used the truth to navigate this relationship. And the truth was that we weren't compatible or it didn't work out. So now all there is left to do is feel the feelings associated with losing somebody and with getting kind of unused to somebody, right? Someone I was used to co-regulating with and going to for lots of things is no longer here. And that hurts, but it's the kind of grief that time actually does authentically heal. When you have insecure or complex breakups, what you often have is complicated grief. Grief that kind of sneaks out of nowhere. Grief that hits you in areas where you weren't expecting it. Because again, if your and or the other person's attachment strategies were keeping you from having a fairly clear and uncomplicated view of the relationship, there's probably going to be a lot of second guessing and being unclear about whether or not you made the right decision. And because you're unclear on that, you might feel like you almost want to leave a little part of yourself inside of the relationship emotionally, just in case you actually do want to go back. Or you might think to yourself, what if I had tried saying or doing this? What if I'd kind of tried to play my cards in this way? Then what would have happened? Because again, when we're operating from strategy, there are always about 100 other strategies we could have tried out, which makes it feel really hard to leave a relationship because we might think in our minds, well, what if I said this? What if I'd tried this? What if I'd made this adjustment? As opposed to when we are just laying our cards on the table and being really clear with each other about what's going to work and what's not, we aren't left with all of this second guessing because we saw all of the cards, we knew what we could or couldn't make of them, and then it feels easier to move on. Now, the reason we talk about all of this is not to make it feel hopeless if you are insecurely attached and wanting to leave a relationship. Why we talk about this is because it's going to be very difficult and in a lot of cases very shame-inducing if you are comparing a complex breakup to a simple one and feeling like you are absolutely crazy for not being able to feel those very simple, clean emotions that more secure people feel when they leave a relationship. Or if you feel like you can't seem to explain the relationship or why you left it in a way that makes sense to other people. That actually is normal for an insecurely attached breakup, which is just to say, if you are waiting for your relationship to become very simple and feel clean and easy to leave, it's highly likely you're going to stay in it for much, much longer, if not forever, because it might never get to that place. So at a certain point, that inconsistency or that confusion or that sense of this person is telling me what I want to hear, but they're not walking the walk, those things need to be taken as data points in and of themselves, right? In a secure relationship, I want to feel like my partner's words and their actions line up. In a secure relationship, I want to feel like when I'm honest, that gives us the best chance at working through issues. So, again, at a certain point, those inconsistencies or that need to be in strategy for things to work out can actually be a data point that this relationship is not necessarily ever going to function under healthy principles. And then the decision you're faced with is, do I want a relationship that functions under healthy principles or not? This leads us to step two. Step two is once again what we want to start looking at when we've already made that decision. Yes, I want to leave, but I don't know how to do it. Or for some reason, I just feel like my emotional system will not allow me to detach from this relationship. Step two is all about unearthing what is keeping us unconsciously stuck inside of this relationship. The stuff that is keeping you stuck is whatever is unconsciously preventing you from leaving the relationship despite you having a conscious desire to do so. I remember reading this book one time called Why We Change and 10 Reasons Why We Don't by Ross Ellenhorn. It is truly one of the best books I've ever read on decision making, where he talks about the fact that often when we find it really hard to make a change in our lives, it's because we have not gotten super explicit with ourselves about what we would be giving up in order to make that change that we are currently taking for granted. And if we were to make all of that stuff conscious and understand how to get those needs that we're not necessarily noticing are being met through a relationship or whatever it is, if we could find a way to get them met in new ways, then the change would become completely natural. It would be easier to make it than to not make it. And so that's what we're going to talk about with this step. We're going to look at what types of invisible resources we're often getting out of relationships, including relationships that we consciously believe we do not want to be in. Then we're going to talk about how we can start strengthening those areas of our lives in ways that do not rely upon the relationship, so that eventually we get to a place where it feels easy to leave the relationship if that is what we want to do. So I know earlier we were playing with the metaphor of amputating a body part. In this part of the video, I want to play with a different metaphor, which is just imagining that this heartbreak you're going to go through if you leave this relationship is kind of like an injury. Often when we have an injury in the body, it does heal with time, but what we don't always do is target the injury itself if we're, let's say, going to physiotherapy. What we often do is try to strengthen the muscles around the part of the body that is injured, so that we're not putting too much stress on the injured part itself. And that's what I want to encourage us to start thinking about, because to leave a relationship that is giving us a lot of what we want in terms of our romantic needs, what we're doing is kind of injuring ourselves short term. And that is true whether we are secure or insecure. But the way that we do that without falling apart is we work on strengthening all of the other areas in our lives so that they are strong enough to support us through that emotional injury. So we're going to look at some different parts of our lives that we might be neglecting without realizing it, or outsourcing to our relationship without realizing it. So at the center of this graph, just to make things super clear from the get-go, we're going to look at connection to partner. And this is the area that we are going to intentionally be injuring if we leave a relationship. So our connection to partner is often meeting a lot of emotional intimacy needs. It's often meeting a lot of sexual intimacy needs. It's often meeting a lot of needs around kind of co-creating or planning a future with someone. And it's often meeting a lot of our romantic needs, however we define that for ourselves. Now, the kind of love addict approach to ending a relationship is to over-rely on connection to partner to meet a lot of their other needs. So all of the muscles around this one, for someone who might be more love addicted, are likely being quite neglected. So what they're going to do is target this muscle specifically and go, well, I can't leave this part of my life unattended, because if so, I'll just be weak overall. So I need to find a different partner before I leave my current relationship, either to already date or to have kind of lined up so that this muscle is never left weakened. But this creates a whole host of other problems. So, what we want to start looking at is how do we allow this muscle to take a hit and trust that it will be absorbed by everything surrounding it? The first thing we want to look at is connection to self. When we really love and trust ourselves and value our own competence and our own compassion, our relationship with ourselves serves as a very strong resource when we leave romantic relationships. But if we are outsourcing a lot of our sense of self to the relationship, what happens is that we start to worry, if I leave this relationship, I'm going to lose a really strong connection to a part of myself that I believe can only be alive through this relationship. The question we want to be asking ourselves here, if we want to start strengthening this area, is if I leave this relationship, in what ways am I going to self abandon? So maybe when I am in a romantic relationship, I tell myself I'm a good, worthy, lovable person. But as soon as I'm not in a relationship, I tell myself I'm an unworthy, unlovable person. I'm now abandoning the part of myself that I was allowing myself to keep online in that relationship, which is the belief that I am lovable and worthwhile and a good person. And I'm taking that away from myself. We might need to do some strengthening in the area of self regard before leaving the relationship so that we know, even if this person is no longer in my life anymore, I'm not going to kick myself off my own team because they're gone. I'm going to keep on believing that I am worthy and lovable, or whatever it is that I believed, by virtue of being in a partnership with this person. My self concept holds true. Another thing we might want to look at, particularly if we have any codependency online, is what parts of myself am I trying to heal or stay in connection with through this other person? So let's say I don't really care about my own health or well being, but I'm really fixated on my partner's well being. What I'm doing in that case is just projecting the part of myself that I know needs to be tended to and cared for onto someone else because it's not threatening for me to see someone else as vulnerable and in need, but it is threatening for me to see myself as vulnerable and in need. So if I want to be able to leave that relationship without feeling unbelievable guilt, what I'm going to need to do is re-internalize that part of myself that knows that I need that same type of care and nurturance and tending to that I'm telling myself other people desperately need from me. So a lot of this process is the process of realizing what have I allowed to come alive inside of myself, which energies are kind of online in me when I'm with this other person, and how am I going to find a way to keep those energies online, whether they're positive things or whether they're problems that I'm trying to solve. How do I keep in connection with all of that once I leave this relationship? And until we have a clear answer to that, and we've given ourselves some proof that we are going to nurture those things in ourselves outside of the relationship, it's going to be really hard to feel like we want to leave. The next thing we're going to look at, and we're going to move pretty quickly through this because I think it's one that is generally fairly conscious for people, is connection to resource. And when I say resource here, I'm talking about the more overt forms of resource like money and shelter and practical stability. These are areas, particularly in long-term relationships, that do get disrupted when we leave them. So what we just want to be making sure of here is that we have a concrete plan. If this is, let's say, someone we have combined our finances with or who we live with, of how we are going to sustain ourselves on a practical level once we've left the relationship. And if we don't have a clear answer for that, what we might need to do is just spend some time getting our ducks in a row and making that a really big priority for a while so that we know I'll be able to transition out of this relationship without completely destabilizing myself on a practical level. The next thing we're going to look at is connection to social networks. So, do you have emotional intimacy with people outside of your partnership? Do you have friends you can turn to? Family members, either blood family or chosen family, who you know you can rely on to have your back during the kind of messier, more human moments that you're going to go through during a breakup, where you need someone to talk to until the wee hours of the morning, or when you need to be checked because you're pretending the relationship and the breakup means nothing to you, but the people who love you know that that's not necessarily true. So this is often the type of support that we get through friends and community. But if those things are not available to you, it might be worth looking at whether you can get a counselor for a period of time while you're preparing to leave this relationship, or someone else who you can trust to co-regulate with you in a way that is relatively undistorted, so they're getting that full picture of things and helping you make integrated decisions. Or if there's existing social relationships that you've been neglecting, that it might be time to go back and strengthen. And ideally, we don't want to be doing this in a transactional way, right? Like, oh, I'm going to be going through a breakup, so it's time to reconnect to my friends so I can lean on them for a while until I get back into the next relationship. What we want to be doing here is building a consistent social network so that this muscle always stays strong. Because if this muscle is strong in your next relationship you get into, this is going to help hold you up even in short-term instances like you and your partner are in a fight, or you and your partner are struggling in your relationship in some way. You're not going to feel like this relationship is my only chance at intimacy or connection. It's the only way I can have that need fulfilled. This is about dispersing that need in a wider way so that it doesn't feel threatening to take a step back temporarily or permanently when that's the healthiest thing for us to do, either for ourselves or for the relationship itself. Because even in the healthiest relationship, people need space, people need to take time apart from their partners, they need to be able to go co-regulate with other people and get a more well-rounded view of themselves and their relationship reflected back to them, right? So this is something that as much as possible, we want to keep alive all of the time. But we particularly just want to keep an eye on it if we're feeling like leaving a relationship is going to mean losing touch with the part of ourselves that is in intimate connection with other people, period. Being seen and understood deeply is a human need. And if we feel like we are only getting that met in one capacity, it's going to be really, really hard to let that go. And this leads us to the last resource I want to look at today, which is connection to purpose. So do we feel like there is a reason why we need to stay healthy and to care about ourselves? When we have a sense of purpose, a sense of my life matters in a way that is bigger than me, we end up kind of caring about our own well-being as a product of that. Because if I feel like the only point of life is to enjoy myself and have a good time, I'm just going to follow whatever whims I have and leave whatever situation is no longer making me happy. Or I'm going to persist way too long at situations that once made me happy but are now kind of making other areas of my life unmanageable. When we feel like we have some sort of drive or purpose or meaning in our life, we have to take our own well-being and our own mental and emotional and physical health seriously because we matter to other people. So caring for ourselves is no longer just a personal issue. And I think that this is, at its core, the thing that is really missing most of the time when we get stuck in these situations where we know we should leave something, but we can't. We don't have a sense that we matter in a deep way to the world or to other people. And so we're not necessarily looking at caring for ourselves as an act of social responsibility. When we start looking at it that way, we start to naturally think about, okay, what resources, both socially and practically and emotionally, do I need to keep myself feeling okay? So it becomes intuitive to start strengthening those muscles as a regular part of our mental health regime. When we don't feel like our lives matter or have any purpose or value, it's really easy to neglect all of the rest of this. And so often, what we need to do in these situations where we find it really hard to leave something that we kind of know we want to is do some soul searching and really get in touch with what is the bigger fish that I want to fry here? How could I contribute to the world or my community or other people in a way that makes it imperative for me to care about myself? And in a way that is going to cause me to deliberately choose romantic relationships where I feel supported and where I feel like the relationship is healthy and adding stability to my life rather than the opposite. Having a sense of purpose helps keep the rest of our life and our relationships in perspective. And of course, it's not as easy as just deciding to have meaning or purpose one day when you wake up, right? But it's worth noting that if that's an area of your life that you have neglected, if you have not spent a lot of time really getting clear with yourself on who am I and in what ways do I want to contribute to the world, it's probably going to start causing a lot of problems in a lot of other areas. And so this might be the question that you want to spend the most time with. How do I want to give back? What do I want to do with my life? What is going to make me feel like my time on this earth matters? In our physical bodies, we have big muscles and we have smaller muscles. And a sense of purpose in our emotional body is a really big muscle group. If it's weak, targeting the smaller muscles around it is not going to get you anywhere close to as far as strengthening this muscle is. So, as we look at all of these different areas, I just want you to really notice and pay attention to which of these things do I kind of project onto my partnership, or which of these things have gotten enmeshed with my partnership. And I don't want you to shame yourself in this process, right? That's the opposite of the idea here. What we just want to do is really look at, am I getting most of my social needs met through my partner? Has my sense of purpose in life become very intertwined with my partner? And that might not be the most unhealthy thing, right? Often, if we have a family with someone or we combine our lives in major practical ways, it's natural for those areas to be fairly intertwined. So, the reason we want to look at all of this is just because we want to get clear on what are we going to have to start separating out and strengthening individually, as opposed to doing overall conditioning, which is what we maybe used to do if we've been in this partnership for a long time. So if my social network is super intertwined with my partner's, how do I just start separating that out more and more? If I'm financially dependent on my partner, how do I work on becoming more financially independent? If my sense of purpose in life is very intertwined with my partner, how do I separate that out a little bit and figure out what parts of that mission or that purpose I can keep working on independently, and what parts I'm going to have to grieve as part of the relationship if I walk away from it? And again, we want to spend a lot of time on that question. In what ways am I likely to self-abandon if I leave this relationship? And how do I find ways to keep in connection with the parts of myself that currently only feel alive when I'm around this other person? This leads us to step 3, which is much less technical. Step 3 is making that hard decision to hurt your own feelings. So deciding, now that I've done all of this work, to get clear on how I can step outside of this relationship without bleeding out emotionally. Making the decision to do that and thinking about how to maintain your sense of well-being when you have done that. There is no version of this where this step is painless. Just like that man amputating his own arm hurt like hell, this is highly likely to hurt like hell. You just need to be able to trust yourself enough to inflict what you know to be necessary short-term pain upon yourself. Essentially, what we're looking at here is how do we make a recovery plan for ourselves before we leave the relationship? And we want to make sure that we're targeting all of those areas that are generally invisible to us. So everything that we talked about in step 2, to make sure that we are keeping those areas strong after the breakup happens. So do we have a plan for how we will nurture our connection to self in the moments where we feel like we are self-abandoning? Do we have a strategy in place, maybe someone we can call or an activity we can do that will reconnect us to ourselves and allow us to nurture the parts of ourselves that were once being nurtured in the relationship once we have left it? Do we have a social network or other people in our lives who we are intentionally and deliberately nurturing our relationships with, even on the days when we feel like garbage and don't want to go anywhere? Do we have a sense of purpose and meaning in our lives? Do we have something that gets us out of bed in the morning that we are willing to get out of bed in the morning for, even when we are absolutely heartbroken? And in a lot of ways, we're going to have to be strict with ourselves in this process. It's kind of like with literal weight training. Once you've done it for long enough, picking up certain weights feels easy. But then if you stop for a long time and you go to pick up the same amount of weight, it's going to feel incredibly heavy. You might even injure yourself trying to lift it. And it's really going to put into perspective just how fit you were back when that thing felt easy to do. So if you have been nurturing all of these different areas of your life, and it feels like you want to start letting some of them slide because you're in so much pain after this heartbreak, well, it's of course good to give yourself some leniency and some time to be in grief and pain. We want to make sure we're not completely neglecting the regimes that have brought us to the place where we are strong enough to make this decision for ourselves in the first place. So we need diligent and holistic emotional strength training practices that we stick to when we are heartbroken. And what we want to do is make sure that we are planning in our more integrated moments. So the moments where it feels like we see the situation more clearly, we understand that leaving this relationship is going to hurt, but it's going to be worth it. Those are the places we want to make our plans from. We don't want to make plans about leaving the relationship when we are in a blind rage at our partner. We don't want to make plans about leaving the relationship when we are feeling super triggered into anxious wounding and it feels like nothing is ever going to be okay again if we leave. We want to be making plans from our most resourced state. So if you can, let's say, hire a coach or a therapist or someone who can sit with you and help you stay in that resourced state when you're thinking about leaving, these are the places where we want to build our plans from. When I was in the thick of my own attachment wounding, was fearful avoidant. It meant that I was often only really looking at either the logic of the situation or the emotion involved in a situation at a given point in time. So I would let all of my feelings do the decision making, and then I would get into a deactivated state and see all of the things that didn't make sense, and then make a different decision about the relationship and kind of ricochet back and forth between those states. And as I was earning my way towards secure attachment, the last breakup I had where I was still pretty fairly entrenched in my fearful avoidant patterning, I wrote a letter to myself on a day when I was feeling more secure than not. That was just acknowledging, hey, you're probably going to have a day where you are feeling overwhelmed with emotion and where you are remembering all of the positive parts of the relationship and all of the ways in which you miss that person. And I want you to know that all of those feelings are real. You really did love them. You really did have a deep, special emotional connection with them. They really were a truly wonderful person in all of these ways, and I hope you find a way to keep treasuring that. But that was not enough to make the relationship work in a long-term way. And the fact that these practical things or these unaligned values were there, and you loved them so much, was precisely what made it so hard to leave. But now I need you to be in your integrated self and be able to hold both all of the very real emotions that you're feeling right now and the logic of why we can't go back on our decision because of those emotions. So whatever it is that you think you are going to potentially fall prey to after you leave the relationship, whatever you think might suck you back in, maybe it's going to be that person reaching out to you and expressing either apology or distress. Maybe it's going to be feeling insecure. Maybe it's going to be feeling guilty. Try to plan for what you're going to need when that arises. What are you going to need to remember if you are feeling overwhelming guilt or overwhelming confusion and distress? In your more grounded and more integrated moments, plan for that. Write yourself letters to read in the future. Talk to your family and friends about the distortions that you know you start making in your own mind when your attachment patterning comes online. Ask them if they're willing to lovingly check you and help keep you in reality. And if there are people you trust, like a therapist or a close friend, it might not hurt to ask them, where do you think I might get stuck? And how do you think I might be able to plan ahead for that? And this kind of leads to the last point I want to make about all of this, which is that at the end of the day, what we want to treat all of this as is an opportunity to practice wholeness. So again, to be insecurely attached or to have early wounding often means that we try to put everything into black or white categories because that was once adaptive. But feelings and relationships and our experience of being human as a relationship ends is one giant gray area. And so anytime a conflicting feeling comes up or something unexpected arises in your awareness, maybe you feel regret where you thought you'd feel hope, or grief in an area where 2 days ago you felt joy, it's just the opportunity for you to start mapping that gray area in a way that allows you to understand it better. Because everything that comes up after a heartbreak and inside of a heartbreak is an authentic part of your experience. And if you can stay on the page with as much of it as possible and learn to just watch it and get to know it and listen to it, which is what we're going to talk about in some of the videos that are coming up, you're going to learn an immense amount about yourself and about your values and about your ability to be in relationship with other people. So instead of beating yourself up every time you feel something that seemingly conflicts with what you thought you would feel or what you wanted to feel, instead, can you stay curious about it? And can you allow that to be a part of your experience as a whole person who contains multitudes and who is always learning what it's like to be alive? The more we're able to map out that gray area accurately, even if there are things on it that we wish were not on it, right? I really wish I didn't have that feeling. I really wish I didn't have that impulse. It's all a practice in getting to know ourselves. And when we have a more accurate map of ourselves, we're able to better choose the routes through our own experience of life that maximize our own authenticity and aliveness. But it's really hard to do that if we're denying major parts of our experience. So, if we allow it to be, heartbreak can be an incredible opportunity to get to know ourselves much more deeply. And being willing to treat it as such is exactly the skill that is ultimately going to help us find much more aligned relationships that we can show up to in a much healthier way the next time around. All right, I think I'm going to leave this at that for today. As always, let me know what's coming up for you guys as you've gone through this video. Any thoughts, feelings, questions, please let me know in the comments below. As always, I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and your inner children, even when it's really hard to do that, and each other. And I will see you back here again really soon.